Dr. Aston, good afternoon.
Hello.
Good afternoon from Russia, from the Media Festival, the Bulgarian Europe.
Good afternoon.
And can I kindly ask you, first of all, what is interactive documentary? That's why we are coming to you with this Skype connection.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I've always been very clear that for me, interactive documentary is an arena for a series of conversations and exchange between makers in industry, between academics and between communities about the evolving possibilities for documentary making that the latest, we've always had technology, has always brought new developments and new possibilities to documentary making. And we're just looking at the role of the computer and how now that the internet has become, in a way, the mass medium of the early 21st century, how that is affecting documentary making. However, when we say at the centre is the internet as the new medium, the forms, the way documentary is evolving in response to that goes beyond the web doc. So for us, interactive documentary is an exchange and a dialogue, an interdisciplinary dialogue between filmmakers, designers, computer people, working with web docs, but also working with mobile phones, with installations, with live performance. So there's a variety of ways that documentary is responding to this new mass medium, and it's not just web docs.
Where the term interactive documentary comes from?
Well, interesting. It was used, Gloriana Davenport at MIT used it, and it's a term that I have been sort of teaching my students for a number of years, right in the early days when we had video disc, which was a big silver disc, and working with Sandra Gaudenzi, who also was an early pioneer in the industry. And we together, we could see that computers were affecting the documentary form, and we met in 2010, and we decided it was a good moment to convene our first symposium and to see what the interest was, and we had to give it a name. And so because of the time with all the iPads and iPhones and all the rest of it, we came up with the idea of idocs. So that's where it came from. But interactive media, my PhD, which I finished in 2003, was on interactive multimedia, which at the time was a well-known phrase. And at the time, I wondered whether to call it interactive documentary, because I was looking at ethnographic film and the documentary form. So in a way, for me, it was a natural evolution from interactive multimedia to focus in on how that was affecting the documentary form.
Can you tell us more about the research methods of idocs?
Yeah. Well, one of the key things, because both terms, interactive and documentary, neither of them are straightforward terms. So, what is a documentary is a very widely discussed topic, and not everybody has the same idea of what a documentary is. So one of our research methods would be at the basis that we would say, for us, a documentary isn't just film. So documentary making has a longer and a wider tradition that goes back to experiments in photography, experiments in sound. So it goes back to the beginnings of recording media. in itself. So that's one of our core research methods, is to have that breadth. And then another one, we need to interrogate what we mean by interactive. And for us, although we're saying interactive documentary, we are putting the computer in there. We're saying that it's how people use computers and work with them that's our core interest. So again, our research methods are humanistic and put people at the center. And then we look at the relationship between the makers of documentary work, between the documentary subjects, and between the audience. So one of our research methods is to look at how those relationships play out in these new forms. And we never call it a genre. Interactive documentary for us is not a genre. It's a set of possibilities. But we look at what the computer brings to the relationship between subject, makers and audience. And we're fully aware that in terms of interactivity and participation, there's already a really great tradition. What the computer brings is new possibilities, or both new ways of working of that relationship between subjects, the documentary subject and the maker, but also new ways of looking at the relationship with the audience in that. And again, that takes us into traditions of live performance and theatre, if you like, and people like Brecht and breaking of the fourth wall, and a lot of the multimedia happenings of the 60s that experimented with that relationship between stage and audience. So a core of our method is looking at that three-way relationship, and not claiming that it's completely new to be playing with these relationships, but just looking at the evolving possibilities for playing with those relationships. And then for me, I have a background in anthropology, so I'm particularly, what drew me, the methods that drew me to interactive documentary in the first place were the possibilities for working with multiple points of view. So for using multiple windows, split screens and non-linearity to interrogate database narrative, or to explore different points of view in a way that was, opened up different possibilities for looking at complexity, moving beyond the linear edit of a film. And for multimedia methods, looking at how we can combine, say, the readerly aspects of books with the more immersive aspects of film and sound, and the different relationships we can create using interactive media. So, but one of the key things in interactive documentary is about collaboration and participation. And Henry Jenkins has written a lot on this, and he talks a lot about participatory media. So that's definitely a key theme in interactive documentary. But we also are looking at things like clicktivism, which is talking about how documentary can become relevant and useful in the world.
Thank you very much for that answer, but can I kindly ask you to tell us the biggest projects that are using this set of tools?
Yeah, well, the gold standard, if you like, in terms of where the big projects are being made, Canada and the National Film Board of Canada is a major investor in interactive documentary. So Kat Sisek and Jerry Flahive, they presided over a project called High Rise, which was a multi-platform, multi-year project about high-rise living as one of the dominant and growing forms of modern living, certainly, at the turn of the century. So they made several different projects exploring that. some of them based in Canada, some of them based more globally, using lots of different media, exploring different forms of participation. Kat's a filmmaker and an anthropologist at heart, so she was very keen to put people at the centre of that process. And the National Film Board of Canada doesn't just have high-rise. Their website, you can find many interactive projects that they have funded. So there's a lot there. And then France have been leaders as well. A company called UPIAN, working with the French broadcasting company Arte, that work across into Germany as well. And they've done a lot of pioneering work, really developing the form. One of my favourites for its potential is Gaza Sederot, which was an early piece that was looking at exploring peace in times of war. So it was looking at everyday life across the divide of Palestine and Israel. And they broadcast daily for 40 days a short film from each of across that divide. And then they made, but really it was designed to be an online experience where you could bring two worlds together through split screen and start to enable a conversation. Another piece is called Alma, A Tale of Violence, which has two parallel linear film streams with a very in-depth and revealing interview with a gang member from Guatemala, where you can watch the whole interview as a straight-to-camera interview, but then on a parallel stream, you can just navigate away from the soundtrack stays the same, but you can see all what you would call the cutaways or the diegetic interpretation of what she's talking about. So you have two parallel streams instead of editing those two streams to a single narrative line. So that's a multilinear narrative. So Arte there's a whole load of projects that they've got. But one of my real favourites is Question Bridge, which comes out of America. And that was some artists who started with a really small local project. And they started with a problem or a question. And their question was, what does it mean to be a black male in contemporary America? And they started just in small communities, talking to people, coming up with a method that was repeatable, that they could roll out all across America. And they crowdfunded, and they started very small, and they started this conversation with a series of film clips. And now they have this huge database that really represents many different perspectives on themes, so that you get that sense of diversity and complexity, and tries to break out of stereotypes and to enable a much broader, more nuanced conversation. But then there's also there's a project called Padma, going to India, which is a huge, big online database. It's like a wiki commons where people are invited to upload their film rushes to this huge meta tag database. And then if you participate, you're then free to use the other material. So it's a huge online interactive database from which people can create media, or they can use it to make their own films or their own interactive works. So we try to, there are these gold standards, highly funded projects. What's so great about the idocs community is that it brings together, people with big budgets, making, Hollywood equivalent of high-end pieces, compared to some other projects that we also have in idocs that are very, very small, localized studies of small communities. And there's something everybody can learn from that dialogue. And we're still independent. We're not funded by anyone. So that gives us that freedom, although it's hard work.
Dr. Aston, my last question is, do you think this is the future? For you, of course, idocs are the present time, not the future. But speaking about the different sets of tools and media tools, do you think the idocs are the future? And how do you look at the media space in few years, let's say?
You know, what's happening now, virtual reality and immersive media, that's become, if you're looking at the future for making money with established conventions, it's quite likely that virtual reality will form in the same way that computer games formed a niche that was well understood, that had a business model, you know, that then enables people to make quite a lot of well-funded projects and actually make a living out of it. I mean, I'm very keen to keep this open-ended and that there will be other forms as well. And one of the things I've been drawn to is theatre and live performance as being part of the landscape that brings people together. But I think the future will as much be about culture and society as it will about technology. I very much believe that people would want to interact, audiences would want to come together, would want to break the fourth wall, would want to participate. But now with all the craziness happening in the world, you know, at one level, I'm thinking people will also want to, they'll have enough excitement in, you know, there's enough excitement in the world and uncertainty. You know, I have a son who's a 12-year-old, and he spends a lot of time consuming short films through YouTube rather than watching feature films, for example. And he's quite familiar with coding. And I use Douglas Rushkoff a lot with my students. He's an American critic and writer, but he did a lecture called Program or Be Programmed, and that's just about the literacy about computer literacy and how, you know, it's important to understand or to try and understand the medium that we're all living in and working in, so that we can have some control over what's happening to us. And I think that's really important, changing literacies, you know, and changing understandings of what different media can offer.
Okay, thank you very much for that. It was very, very bright future looking.
Oh, good.